We focus on the exterior of that home where and especially in Florida where all the bugs are outside. Once you got a humidity problem solved, silverfish gets pretty much solved. Most of it is going to be ants. We deal with so many ants down here. And we have to perform a barrier treatment on a time basis, or that customer is going to call, complain, and we can say, well, we really can't make a chemical application unless you actually complain in order to comply with IPM. There is no customer on the planet, for the most part, that's really going to accept that.
So that's where
Told you it was going to be a hoot.
you just hit the one thing that really just gets on my one last nerve about the IPM stuff,
Right.
because it's that definition. So, and I take ownership of this one,
Okay.
because when we were moving a little history about the Texas pest control rules.
Okay.
We have this huge Department of Ag like everybody else. I mean, that was all enacted, early in the 1900s. In the 70s, when there was this big push for structural pest control across the nation, our agencies split. We ended up with the Structural Pest Control Board and the Department of Ag. Well, the board is the one that got the school IPM law passed and adopted and managed up until about 2007. And then when they were abolished and put on back under the Department of Ag, we had to clean up our school IPM rules. Well, one of the things that I kind of pushed for was defining IPM. So this is the definition that we use in our rules.
Okay.
All structural applicators. Integrated pest management, a pest management strategy that relies on multiple pest control tactics, including the judicious use of pesticides, informed by accurate identification and scientific knowledge of pests, reliable monitoring methods to assess pest presence, preventive measures to avoid pest infestations, and thresholds to determine when corrective control measures are needed. That's a lot of words, but that's it in a nutshell.
Right.
Because including the judicious use of pesticides, if you go look up the term judicious, give thought. I'm going to give thought about what it is, but my informed, accurate identification and scientific knowledge of pests. So here's the conundrum. Every extension specialist in the country, any entomologist, I got some ants and they're black. Really now?
Right.
Little black ants. Well, yes, there is a little black ant, but are those pavement ants? Are they something else? Because an entomologist will tell you, even myself, who's an associate certified entomologist, well, we have close to 250 species of nuisance ants in the United States. Not knowing genus and species, or at least its common name, makes it very difficult for the pest management professional to understand, to make that judicious use of pesticides without understanding accurate identification and scientific knowledge of pests. Now, for you who've been in Florida for a few years, you know what your most common ants are.
Right.
And you know what products you're going to use. Now, you can switch them up. I always tell everybody, the other thing that we don't do, and it's hard, and you probably got one of the best ones sitting right in your own backyard by the name of Faith Oy, who really goes on about changing up your chemical composition.
Yep.
Because that's part of it. But that reliable monitoring methods to assess pest presence, yeah, you use your customer. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
still trying to figure out.
What monitor do you use to monitor a ghost ant pest pressure level in the area? It can't
Well,
be done.
that's what I was thinking. I'm like, I'm not thinking, well, glue boards and ants never go together. But you got to know your area, and you've got to
Yep.
know what's conducive conditions.
Right.
So again, understanding that, I mean, IPM is so much more than that pyramid.
Right.
It really is. And it's that multiple control tactics. And yes, I may even have a little perimeter spray around my house. I mean, I don't want fire ants coming in. I don't want the odorous house ants coming in.
Yep. I mean, we know that you've got odorous and we have ghost ant. You've got, and this is, you got the Tapenoma Cecil, and I've got Tapenoma melacephalum. If I do not make it forced me, this little ant brought me to my knees, made me cry, and basically forced me to have to use fipronil, which I never had to use before. Never had to. In 14 years of pest control, we started using it 2.5 years, 3 years ago, because 50% of all our ant calls were this little ant that nobody could get rid of. And we had to go in and use fipronil on every initial to get, because if we used neonicotinoids, we found ourselves making 2 applications versus
Yeah,
1.
and then you run into a whole nother thing when you're using the neonics nowadays. So yeah.
So now we had to make 2 add more pounds of active ingredient
Yep.
versus a 1 shot where we knocked it down probably 96% on 1 shot because we used the fipronil, versus having to make 2 applications of a neonic, which adds more chemical than necessary. And so we found ourselves in that predicament saying, here we are, an eco-friendly company. We're trying not to use these products, but we have no choice. And now we figured out that if we get it knocked down, we don't have to use it as often. We don't even have to do it quarterly. We only reapply it if our other lower end products haven't gotten the control. But I have to make a timed application of something, because as a commercial business, I can't afford a 30% callback rate, 40%.
Well, and nobody can.
Nobody can.
And we do that again, like I said, down in the Houston Gulf Coast area. I mean, because if you're not in our state, you're battling an ant. We just don't know which species you've got, because
Yeah.
one of them can be, but even with fire ants, depending on, where you're at and stuff, I tell my schools, if it's going to be an area that's going to be heavily used and you can't go out and do the IGR 3-4 times a year, well, then you might need to use the bagged fipronil,
Yep.
top choice,
Yep.
and put that out, because again,
Yeah.
so one of our things that we have to say when we do our school IPM stuff is talk about practical and economical. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, well, we've really got to work that out.
Yeah.
Because I'm also home to the state of, and ironically, I was leaving your home state from a meeting with Faith. On my way back home, we had done a work group meeting and got a call from a school district where a child had died because they had been exposed to fire ants.
Yeah.
And it was one of those deals where part of it was on the coaches who did not understand what anaphylactic shock is,
Right.
didn't get medical help, but at the same time it exposed a weakness on how the district was actually putting out their fire ant bait. Rather than doing the 40 acres that was the joint property between 2 campuses, they were only doing 2 acres surrounding the campus and the athletic field. So, and my comment to everybody was, well, yeah, you treated that, but did you think the fire ants that were out in between those 36 acres, that they knew someplace different?
Right.
No, you know thy beast, know thy pest.
Right.
So the one thing I tell everybody that you were saying, you're worried about the chemistry, you got your labels, you got your safety data sheets, you know how you're applying it,
Right.
but you also put on your service ticket genus and species.
Right.
You put down that specific, because if somebody was going to go and judge you, if they go up and look up stuff, because there's enough out there with credible information on these insect
Right.
pests that we're having to throw things at them because they're not native.
Right.
They don't have a predator here. So they can outcompete, and they can, and their life cycle is so quick, they can also become resistant.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knew being in pest management that you were going to be a detective?
Yeah. No, I mean, when I listened to Bobby Corrigan about, biological
Mm-hmm.
assessment and evaluation, I mean, the terms are, I noticed the terms are changing, and the conversation around, and I think we need to have the healthy conversation about this, because there are those who are defending IPM that it can't be changed. And this is the problem that a lot of people are having with IPM, because it is so rigid in certain areas, where now we're going to assessment based management, with Deanie Miller's talking about that. And that is awesome. It's still not marketable from a pest
Yeah.
control perspective, but we're all supposed to be doing assessment based pest management. All of us.
What
And
about
all
that?
of us are supposed to be doing what Bobby says, to looking at being an observational biologist. And these terms, but when you start throwing the term in IPM, then everybody loses it. And and
Well,
and
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 that's
that's where everybody's getting hung up on.
that's where I'm the rabble rouser, like in the room.
Right.
Because again, I look at my definition going, reliable monitoring methods to assess pest presence. Okay, I'm pretty sure I just threw everything you just said by everybody else in one little sentence, bullet point.
Right.
But again, if you know thy pest, rats, roaches, bats, because I get those calls. I'm sure you do too. Raccoons, ants, spiders, every last one of them's got some type of scientific knowledge, and you've got to assess. And that rigidity
Mm-hmm.
that I know what you're talking about drives me crazy.
Right.
And because this is a PG rated show, we're going to just say drives me crazy.
Right.